all here because we have agreed to move with one another this season in learning sacred organizing, the process of building and exercising our collective power toward a horizon where life can flourish for all beings and for our shared home, Earth. One thing we can all agree on is that we can't do this alone. We are stronger together. 11 community land and housing has cohorts spanning Washington, Multnomah West, Multnomah East, and Clackamas counties, and we work in partnership with the Southeast cohort as well. We are rooted in our communities, in our faith traditions of anti-racism and anti-oppression, and the people for whom we each commit to those practices. We are so much bigger than these little Zoom screens that we're all on right now. So thank you for being here tonight and recognizing the interconnectedness of ourselves as well as the systems we wish to reimagine together, including land, housing, immigration, and so many others. I think it's sometimes important to recognize the things that are bringing us joy. And so thank you for highlighting the things that is bringing you joy this week so far. And I would love to pass it off to Alyssa to introduce herself and some grounding.
Thank you, Lexi. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name's Alyssa. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the East Multnomah County heartbeat holder. And I get to spend some time grounding us this evening. As I was thinking about this evening, I was thinking just what kind of spiritual grounding I maybe need in my life right now. And I've been finding a lot of that in nature. So I want to share a little story with all of you about a couple of trees. My story for you begins today in Mary S. Young State Park, which is not too far from where I live. And in this park, on one of the trails, stands a pair of tree friends. So over time, as you can see here, this cedar tree and fir tree have fused. They've made one really unique, beautiful story from two different lives. It's worth noting that while trees often have friends and share resources via their roots in the woods, cedar trees and fir trees don't necessarily have the same network all the time. But for a healthy ecosystem, both are needed, both in the canopy and also at the forest floor, so that that ecosystem has all of the resources and habitats that are needed. So what you see here in the close-up is something called inosculation. It's where trees naturally graft in a really particular way. And it's unique because of the way it occurs, which is when neighbors rub up against each other. And as you can see, as we're talking about house meetings this evening, and I found a real metaphor here when thinking about our work in community. So what happens is there's an original point of contact where these two trees touched each other. And that slowly, over time, created friction, a wound. And that reveals the cambium, which is like the inner layer of a tree. So beneath the bark is this layer called cambium, and that is the actual alive part of a tree, not the bark, not the wood. The growing part, the alive part, is the cambium. So over time, this friction activates this growth layer, and it grows faster than it normally would if the trees were standing individually. So slowly over time, the two trees are building up scar tissue, and that just starts to encompass one another. And it threads these distinct lives into one that's shared. And it gets to the point where, as you can see here, these two trees are internally sharing resources with each other, which makes sense because now their fates are joined. What happens to one will happen to the other. So as we're going into this time today of learning about house meetings, I just wanted to ground us in this imagery. To think about the ways that we weave our own individual learnings and through the stories and one-to-ones that we have into a shared and more robust presence. I want to ground ourselves in this wisdom that comes from nature and from the wisdom of bumping up against one another and letting that reveal places where we can grow together. We remember that we don't do this work alone, and that there are people who have been here on this land who've understood these connections a lot longer than any of us have. And so if we could do the next slide, I'd like to go to our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this is the ancestral and unceded territory of the peoples of the Multnomah, Wasco, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Cowlitz, Willamette, Tumwater, and Cascades bands of the Chinookan people. the Tualatin Band of Kalapuya, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia, or the Wimal, and the Willamette River. As you can see, I'm just sharing these pictures of trees because they bring a lot of the imagery home. Today, we acknowledge that this region's diverse, vibrant Native communities are still connected to this land. Indigenous peoples, 70,000 strong, with more than 280 tribes with at least 18 unique languages, both local and distant. We extend our deepest gratitude to these siblings and elders, past and present, who have stewarded this land and who carry on tribal traditions for present and for future generations. Let's take a moment of silence in reverence and gratitude. I'm now going to turn it over to Janelle and Jake from Washington County Cohort, and they can lead us deeper and deeper into an understanding of building collective power in house meetings.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. It's really beautiful, and I think a metaphor that really aligns with what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is house meetings. And I think before we start, LaVeta, if you want to pull up the slide of the sacred organizing spiral, it's really important to root us, no pun intended, in where we are in some of our organizing work, I think. So house meetings are a form of sacred action, but they take place in between a sacred encounter and a sacred unveiling, kind of weaving between the two at times. As you're going to learn tonight from Janelle, they are taking our one-to-ones, our sacred encounters, and building on them to build capacity and power, and hopefully lead to some sacred unveilings of some of the systems that oppress us all, as well as the power that we contain in a group. But before we begin, I want to ask you a few questions. Who understands what a house meeting is, or feel like they could teach it to someone else? Go ahead and raise your hand if that's the case and keep it there. Cool, a good number of us. Yeah. About 17 of us. Awesome. 18, 19. Great. You should see the action now to lower your hand. Next question. Can you think of someone right now in the organizing work who you might invite to a house meeting? Go ahead and raise your hand if that's you. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22. Oh my gosh, off the charts. It's 24. Great. Alrighty, go ahead and lower your hand. And last question for y'all is, can you imagine yourself facilitating or help facilitate a house meeting? Go ahead and raise your hand if you feel comfortable doing that. 27, 20, 30? Oh my gosh. I love how half that number feel like they could explain it to someone else, but all of you are so excited to jump in and learn. That's awesome. So why don't we go ahead and lower our hand. Our hope is we'll ask these questions again later, and we hope that most of you, if not all of you, can raise your hand to all of those questions by the end of tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Janelle, though, who is going to introduce us to just a broad overview of what a house meeting is.
So I am Janelle Carranza, and I am the sacred organizer at Covenant Presbyterian, but I'm also part of the design team for both Multnomah County East and Washington County, because both are my homes and I love them both deeply. But with that, also shout out to my heartbeat holders, because they are amazing and I love them to death. It is thanks to them that this work has been very fruitful. But I also really want to name and give us some very basic and like very, very basic bare bones on what a house meeting is. And also naming that a house meeting is our step towards building that collective power. A house meeting is an expanded reflection on our one-on-one conversations and group conversations, and moving towards building that collective power. This is where we start connecting our self-interest into collective interest. And house meetings are my absolute favorite, my favorite part of this whole process. Because we just come from a season of having so many one-on-one conversations, sacred encounters, connections, And it's at this point in me, after having so many one-on-one conversations and connecting with people and having so many conversations, that things are bubbling within me, where I start getting frustrated on different conversations that I'm having. I'm feeling all these emotions. I'm having all these questions, and all these things I can physically feel it inside my body. And it is through this, then I start asking these questions on what are the stories that I'm hearing? What are the questions that are rising, right? And this is where we get to reconnect with the people that we had our one-on-one conversations with. And we see them come around these questions, right? And we start to connect with people that are feeling very similar to me. After our one-on-one conversations, things are bubbling within them too. So we get together and we have a conversation. And we start to go beyond ourselves. So people that maybe hadn't connected before get to connect in this space. I had a one-on-one conversation with 5 people, but those 5 people haven't met yet. And they don't know that there's this thread linking us together. And so then we get together in this room, and that common thread is now pulling us together in this physical space. And I start to go outside of just myself and all these questions and emotions that I'm feeling, and we come together into this one physical space, and I physically see the power coming together. For me, it's a very moment. Oh, this is all of us together in this room. We're feeling very similarly. And you get to see the people that had a similar conversation, or have similar questions, or similar pressures, or similar values, or similar dreams. And it all suddenly makes sense, and it all connects, and it all feels worth it. And this is where we start feeling, okay, like where is this going to go? We are no longer alone. We're moving from I feel seen to I feel held by my community. A house meeting is coming together after one-on-ones and naming the questions and threads that weave us and tie us together. A house meeting is also checking with ourselves too. It makes us question, what have I been hearing around in my conversations? And who are the people that I'm bringing into this space? Are they the right people that I want to be in this space, that I want to have a conversation around this? Where is the energy, right? Is there energy around this? And then what a house meeting is not, you want to go to our next slide, is it shouldn't be a new conversation. So you shouldn't go into your house meeting being, what are we going to talk about? Because we should know what we're going to talk about, because we've had so many one-on-ones, right? And there's a common thread or theme that we're hearing, and that's what we want to talk about in our house meetings. So if you're going into your house meeting feeling like it's new, then we need to go back to our one-on-one conversations and think about, what did I hear? Who do I want to reconnect with, right? What's going to bubble inside of me? It's also not hierarchical. It's not a workshop, right? We're all together and we're walking alongside one another around stories. And it's not a teaching moment, right? It's like hey, these are the conversations that I'm hearing, right? And I've noticed that this is resonant within all of us too. Let's come together and have a good conversation around this, and maybe identify what our next steps are going to be. It's also not stiff or performative. It's going to be very relational. It's going to be very comfortable. It's also not just a nice dinner with friends. It's not just to get together. It's a very strategic meeting when you talk about the things that you've heard. When I go to our next slide, but what's also the point of house meetings? A house meeting is a chance to expand our capacity, right? Going back to it no longer feels like just me, now it's us at both the micro and the macro level. It brings questions on, who are the leaders that I'm accompanying? What is the collective dream that we're holding and working towards together? And it's also a chance to really test out our turnout strategy of, if I invite someone into this conversation, who's going to show up for this? Who has dreams and wants to be around this, right? Who has a want and a need to be physically here and present with the conversations that have been happening? With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jake.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jake. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the heartbeat holder out in Washington County. And we are actually in the middle of our house meeting campaign right now. And so thank you so much, Janelle. I think that really embodies what we are trying to do right now out in Washington County. So before we begin our next section, I just invite you to think about what Janelle said. Maybe take a deep breath. Think about all the one-to-ones you might have had over the last few months, and who you might want to pull together for a collective conversation. I'm going to be asking you to throw some stuff in the chat as I move on to this next section, which, LaVeta, if you want to throw up the slides. We want to make sure that you do not feel alone in these. And like Janelle said, these house meetings should actually be pretty simple. If you've been doing the one-to-ones correctly, you should be already noticing some bubbling up of what is happening in the community. And so here is a sample outline of an agenda. We will send one out to you after this meeting in a lot more detail so that you just need to plug in your context into this outline. For the next few minutes here, I'm just going to go through it all with you, though, so that you know what to kind of ask and expect as you all are setting up your house meetings. First, right at the top, highlighted, you'll notice house meeting name, which isn't so important, but date, time, and location. This is really important as we think about the community that we're holding and how to make these house meetings accessible to them. I know that this was really big for you, Janelle, as you were planning your house meeting, and I'm curious if you're willing to speak about how date, time, and location played a role as you organized your house meeting.
Yeah, so a lot of the people that I actually talked to were people that have 9-to-5 jobs. So me scheduling something in the middle of the day was just not going to work out. But I also have people that were social workers. Social workers. And a lot of their schedules had varied so much. It didn't feel right for me to just name a place and a date and expect them to show up. So it's always like, hey friend, when are you available? But then also the place was really important to me because I knew them all from either growing up or working with them. So we ended up having my house meeting at my house because it was really comfortable for everyone and I knew everyone. And we also don't come from a church background. So all the people that I invited actually don't go to a church. And so that would have been really awkward for them to kind of show up to a church and not feel very welcomed. I feel like that didn't really set the mood for what we were hoping to have conversation around. So I know that was a huge conversation for me on where do you want to have her place? What time?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. It's something so simple as just the time, date, and location, but it can really set the tone for the conversation you're going to have. And if we're serious about centering the conversations that we're having, then asking some of those questions beforehand of should this be at a church or someone's house, what time, those types of things can really make an impact on who shows up and who feels accessible and welcome in that space. The second part that you'll notice is the theme. And this is something that Janelle already touched on, but this should be pretty simple. It should come out of your one-to-ones. And I'm curious right now, as you think about the one-to-ones you've had, what are some potential themes born out of your relational encounter that are already coming up in your community that you'd be curious to bring into a larger conversation? And go ahead and throw those in the chat. Awesome. Josh Kingsley says, aging without resources. So that's a common theme in Josh's one-to-ones that he's noticing might require a bigger conversation, might lead to something larger. Lexi says, spaces to grieve. Definitely, there's a lot to grieve. I'd be curious about what specifically you're hearing, Lexi, and how to tie that more closely together. Working people still not making rent. That's huge. Schools knowing of families unable to pay heat or rent. Yeah, specifically at the intersections then of those who are interacting with those communities, for sure. Neighbors on our block living outdoors. Stressing about money. Awesome, keep throwing these in the chat. This kind of goes to show though that y'all already know the conversations. Y'all have already done the work to surface what's on people's heart, more than just your own. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Rita. The next thing you'll notice, other than arrival and refreshments and welcome and introductions, which is standard for all of our gatherings, is the framing. This is really important. This is the point in the agenda that connects the overarching question that you're asking to the people. Many people are going to show up to these house meetings expecting like, oh, what are you going to provide for us? And this is a time to go, no, this is born out of the conversations we've had. This isn't us providing something for you so much as all of us coming together around something that I've seen through my organizing practice. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next parts you'll see is the grounding, and you'll see that I've highlighted grounding along with next steps, reflection and evaluation, and closing. This is an excellent opportunity for leadership development. As Janelle said, house meetings are an awesome time to build capacity, and that doesn't just mean numbers. That means that we're also building up leaders at every step of the way as well. And if this is a conversation with the community that feels this most directly, then what an amazing opportunity to say, we want you to reclaim your agency and take center stage in these meetings as well. So I'm curious, as you think about these issues or these themes that you've named in the chat, such as fear of houseless people, aging without resources, our houseless crisis with our neighbors, who are some of the leaders in those conversations that you would want to raise up, that you would want to accompany into learning some of these facilitation skills and organizing skills? And go ahead and throw their names in the chat. Linda. Caitlin. Some pantry folks. I'm sure that makes sense in your context. Kevin. Ooh, Sandy, Kim, Sabrina, Sonia. I think that there's a tendency when we are hosting an event to want to control all of it instead of relying on the community and the expansiveness that we know already exists, to trust the leadership and wisdom in the room. Awesome. Keep throwing those names in the chat. And we're going to go move on to the next slide. The next part is possibly the most important part of the evening, which is the story. As with most of our house meetings, we center the wisdom of the room. We are not here to tell you what to do or next steps, or that we have all the answers. We simply have a set of practices that might surface the wisdom that already exists. And the story is the point at which we set an example of that. This is often someone who is directly connected to the theme of the evening and requires the most accompaniment, as it is one of the most vulnerable pieces as well in the house meeting. Questions you should be asking when thinking about this part is there a story that struck you in your one-to-ones or felt particularly resonant for this group to hear? From there, like I said, requires a lot of accompaniment. How are you going to help this leader feel confident in telling that story publicly? And as well as the debrief afterwards, how did that feel for them? What parts did they wish that they went deeper? What parts felt a little sticky? What parts felt too vulnerable, possibly? Next slide.
Oh, Jake, before we go to the next slide too,
Yeah.
something I wanted to add that I remembered
Go.
is that when you and me were talking about our leaders for story, is that we were very strategic in who we asked to be in that space. Remember, I specifically asked one leader to share, and he was very comfortable sharing. But I know that him sharing his story and who he was, and the way that he shared his story, would bring out two other people in that room to get into their story and feel more connected too. I just wanted to name that too.
Definitely. Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, this really is a key piece. Who is going to be most strategic to tapping into other people's story as well? Last piece is the one-to-ones. So just as we have someone come up in a storyteller position in our house meetings, we honor that story by connecting it to our own. They're not the only ones sharing out of their vulnerability. We recognize that our liberation is intrinsically bound together, and that if we don't see our own story in that, that can quickly become problematic. And so we ask very strategic one-to-one questions to harvest some of that collective wisdom. And after those one-to-ones, we pick a good facilitator. This is not a time for beginners to start to surface out of those one-to-ones what we were hearing. What were some of the themes we're noticing? What were some of those common threads, those systems of oppression that we might all be feeling together? And so with that, that is the entire agenda for the evening. We hope that you feel more comfortable with what a house meeting is and how it's structured. And really after that, all it is turnout. That if we have the agenda, if we have the people, if we have the theme as we've named in the chat, then all it is making the invite. And so with that, I'm going to invite Jules up, who might ask some more strategic questions that get us deeper into it.
Thank you so much, Jake and Janelli, for that really deep teaching on house meetings. So friends, what we're going to do, I want you to take a moment and think about what Janelli and Jake have just shared with us. House meetings are a venerated and well-practiced way for us to begin to weave together the stories and encounters we've had. I want you to think of any questions, simple to complex, that arise for you about what was just shared. So take a moment and do that. And I'm going to ask the room for some things, but first I'm going to ask Jake and Janelli some questions as you're thinking. All right. So, Jake, Janelli, as you were talking, I was thinking about the question of a house meeting. Like, it kind of centers around a story and a question and a conversation. And you all have had a couple of house meetings just this week where this is really fresh for you. You've done it with Christchurch and the Queer Resource Center in Washington County. You've done it, I believe, with the Latinx community in Washington County, and you have some coming up as well. How did you really nail down the question? How do you know what to really ask and to make it tight? How do you do that? What did you learn?
One of the things that I want to say with nailing down my question that was really helpful is talking to my heartbeat holders, because I'm not a concrete person. I had all these ideas coming, and it took me a while. I sat down with Jake for 15, maybe 20 minutes on what is the question I'm going to ask. These are all the conversations that I had, and I don't know what the question is. And Jake's like, well, let's thread it, right? So for me, my process of getting a concrete question is really sitting down with someone else and reflecting with them on, okay, these are the questions, these are the things that came up in my one-on-ones. How am I going to simmer that into a question? And then my questions started rising on Latinx and feeling enoughness, but then also feeling enough within our own home and our own context.
Jake, would you add anything to that? Thanks, Janelli.
Yeah, I think there comes a point once you've had enough one-to-ones, for me at least, in planning some of mine, specifically with the WQRC in Christchurch, where you start to feel it burning up in yourself. Like, oh, like I need to talk to someone about this. And then reflecting back on all the one-to-ones you have and being like, so where does this burning resonate with the burning in someone else? And then you start to list all those people. And I see a question in there in the chat that says, what is the ideal size? I would say once you feel that question resonating with 6 to 20 people, no more than 20, no less than 6, you should probably start thinking about a house meeting.
That's awesome. Thank you for answering that question. I'm seeing Violet's asking, like, how long should these meetings take? What's the ideal meeting length? It looks like from the agenda that you shared, it's about 90 minutes. It's not that long. Is that Would you adjust that at all? Does it depend on the population of people you're talking with? How do you think about the length?
I can go ahead and answer and see if you want to add anything, Janelli. But I think 90 minutes is the perfect length. There's a tendency when it is a really burning question to want to go, oh, we could talk about this all night. But a part of house meetings is building up that energy towards something bigger, towards a bigger action. And you don't want to burn out all that energy in one night. You just want to surface it so that there's a fire lit to carry you through the rest of the organizing season. So 90 minutes is about the right time to do that. I'm curious if you'd add anything, Janelli.
No, for me, 90 minutes has been feeling really good. That's kind of what I planned for. And also something I wanted to add is that you could have more than one house meeting. Like we had 3 in Washington County and we had 4 in East County, right? And so you can have multiple house meetings if multiple questions are coming up, or if you feel like that time is just not enough, then let's make another one because there's obviously something else happening. And that's okay.
I love that idea that you can like go with the momentum, see how many folks are really in it, and then keep building on that. One of the questions I was ruminating on while you all were talking was, okay, and you started to touch on this, but okay, so I've done all these one-to-ones. I hosted a house meeting. Yay. I had 15 people. They were all burning about the same pressures and ready to do something. Now what? What do I do with all of that? Where do I go? Who do I tell about what's I just discovered? What's the next step?
I think there are multiple different pathways, a choose your own adventure, if you will. Sometimes in a house meeting, you start to surface really clear next steps with other organizing practices. For example, you start to realize that one organization, one system, or one person is holding the power over. At which point the next step would be, we need to host a research meeting to get to know more about this person, organization, or entity. That's a clear next step. Sometimes it isn't so clear. Sometimes it's a little muddy, and maybe you need to go back to your one-to-ones to see what's surfacing again, or host another house meeting with different people to start to surface some of that as well. As Janelli said, building capacity is a huge reason for house meetings. And usually once the spark lights at the first house meeting, people want to invite other people. So giving them a space to get new ideas, fresh stories in, can also spark some of that. Janelli?
Something too that I wanted to name that that as you were talking came up for me is after you have your storytellers and then your one-on-ones and you start doing your harvesting, so many times we have questions that come into that space. You start asking yourself, okay, how do we get to that question of, well, what can we do, right? So what's happening right now? Let's do research on what's happening right now. And also identifying who are someone that we want to talk to too, right? It's an elected official that just happens to be a neighbor down the street. I'm like, hey, let's get them connected. They're in the neighborhood. We should talk and see their thoughts. Or it might be just getting someone else in the room, being like, hey, actually, I know this person. Let's have another house meeting. I want to have a follow-up conversation with them to know what they're thinking. It's also a place to share ideas on where next steps could potentially be and what you're curious about together.
I think that's super helpful. I'm noticing Beth asked a really good question in the chat about, okay, and I'm going to interpret this, but Beth, so hopefully I'll get it right. Let me know in the chat if I'm not. So you've had a bunch of one-to-ones, not just an individual, but the group, you know, you're in a core team or you're in a community all having encounters, and there's some intuition bubbling, right? Call a house meeting. Does the house meeting clarify for you your intuition, or is it only a confirmation? Like, how do you think about like what a house meeting does when you think you know what's already happening in your community? Does that question make sense? Like, is it both and is it only one thing? How do you think about like what a house meeting can do for you? And are there multiple avenues? Are there multiple ways you can use a house meeting? 1, to clarify a question, 2, to start to just thread things together, are house meetings flexible, or is it only for one thing?
It's a house meeting is flexible and it's supposed to be flexible and things are going to come out of it. So it's okay to schedule another house meeting. It's okay to schedule another one. And it's okay to ask questions outside of it too. So, do you want to add on to that? I lost my train of thought for a second.
No, you're good. I think to answer your question, Jules, a lot of house meetings can answer a lot of questions, such as, is the question, the communal question that I'm hearing, is that the right one? Is there energy behind it? Is there urgency? The other question that it answers is, are the people that I'm organizing actually going to turn out for something like this? Turnout strategy is huge. There might be energy, but if only 5 people show up, then that's pretty telling. And so I remember, Janella, you were talking about house meetings as kind of a checkpoint. That's exactly what I use it for, is it's a checkpoint to gauge, am I building power in the right direction, or do I need to change the question or change the leaders? Hopefully too, a house meeting will surface a whole bunch of questions in a good way. House meetings are usually the point at which you're like, this is really important, but I don't know where else to go. So you invite the wisdom of the room, surface a bunch more questions, and then you start moving there together as opposed to alone.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to stop us there. We have, I'm sure, more questions. What I will say to the room is, you have a heartbeat holder. You have an Alyssa, a Jake, Sarah, and Anna. You have lots of folks on your design team, your companion for your core team. If you're like, I'm still a little bit worried about this, those are the folks to talk about this with and to talk to, and they'll be able to help make sure that this is just an easy and exciting process and an opportunity to generate like the information that you've never thought you could get from your neighbors and your community before, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett, because we're going to move into one-to-ones to have a little bit of heart-based conversation about the things that Janelle and Jake have brought to us tonight. Thank you, Janelle and Jake, for your house meetings, for your failures, for your successes, for your practices, and for all of your learnings that you've shared with us. Brett, thank you so much for leading us in this part.
Sure, I'm happy to. My name is Brett Pinder. I use he, him pronouns. I am the heartbeat holder for the Southeast Portland Sacred Organizing Cohort and the pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church here in Southeast Portland. As is our practice for listening and building relationships and building power among ourselves, I'm going to be inviting you into breakout rooms for one-to-one conversations. As we start to kind of shift our energy that way, I want to invite you to think about a time that you've had a conversation with a group of friends or maybe a group of your family members. And you sat down and you realized that you all had some opinions around a similar problem that you were noticing. And then together you were able to kind of lean in together and think about how to address it. It was a conversation maybe of some collective trust and brainstorming and moving forward. In our one-to-one conversations, you are invited to reflect on where a conversation like that, a house meeting, would be helpful to you right now. So in the chat box, there will be populated 3 questions. Where would a collective conversation serve you now in your organizing or listening work? Who would you invite? And where would you gather? We're going to have about 12 minutes in our one-to-one conversations. And when we return, Anna will debrief with us.
Hello, I'm seeing everyone pop back up here. And I just had a great one-to-one with Allison, so I'm looking forward to hearing how all of yours were. This is going to be the time of the meeting that we often refer to as evaluation. So we're going to reflect both on the practice of house meetings that we just learned about in that great teaching from Jake and Janelle, and about the one-to-ones that we just came back from. So this is the part where we take all the little bits and pieces that are in our own heads and that were happening in those little breakout rooms in our one-to-ones, and then bring them together and get a sense of what's happening here in this room collectively. Kind of what we're learning and what we're noticing, or where we're feeling energized or like stuck or secretly confused, you know? So I'm gonna drop a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll actually just give you a couple of minutes to collect it all inside your head. So to reflect quietly, you're welcome to like journal and write it down, or even write it down on a little doc if you like, and sort of bring those thoughts together before we share back as a group in that chat out loud. So I invite you now to like get comfortable, maybe stretch. I feel like I need to stretch. And take a deep breath. And exhale slowly. And consider these 3 questions, and I will drop them in the chat as well. What patterns or themes did you notice in your one-to-one sharing? What kind of came up that seemed in common there? And what new skill or resource or maybe aha moment or sort of intuitive ease did you encounter in the teaching about the practice from Jake and Janelli? Then one last third question is, where do you have questions or stuck places or confusion? Jules got us started on that, and now that you've had a little more time to practice, go ahead and think about that. If I could ask this whole room of people one question as I imagine a house meeting that I'm looking forward to or who I might invite, what would I ask? All right, I am going to drop that in the chat, and I'll give you all 2 minutes to think about that. All right, I would love to hear from you all what you noticed in your one-to-one sharing. What patterns or themes popped up in your time together? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the chat, or if anyone wants to share out loud, that would be great too. Rihanna is mentioning the tension between offering welcome and hospitality and needing to have boundaries for collective safety. Wow, that's a like really great tension. I feel that too. Ellen is talking about her aha moment, which is that I need to do more one-to-one meetings before moving to a house meeting. I appreciated the teaching on that as well. Michelle is talking about moving forward without all the answers and connecting people. Michelle, am I understanding correctly that that's like deciding to move forward even if you don't have all the answers yet? Okay, I'm seeing a nod, yeah. I also resonate with that. I was similarly talking about feeling a little stuck and maybe then avoidant because I can't lay out exactly what will happen in that house meeting, which is kind of the point, right? That's why we have them. Bob is talking about our land stories playing a big part in our organizing. We still have that question of who do we invite to house meetings? And Story resonated with that, who to invite and the different barriers for certain groups. Josh noticed in the one-to-one that we were both researchers trying to understand how our movement moves. Ooh, I love that. And realized a scientific perspective can be helpful in our work, and wondering how that sort of scientific way of thinking might help thinking about the movement from one-to-ones to house meetings. And then on the like maybe flip side of that, Marianne is talking about how house meetings offer an opportunity to speak from the heart rather than the mind. And Allison talks about, yes, we had organizer confessions in our one-to-one, which is great. I recommend it. Feelings of where I have shortcomings or imperfections surrounding house meetings. And an aha moment was that as we have meetings around a project we would like to move forward, it's important to illuminate the stories that bring everyone there. I love that. And feel free now to kind of reflect also on that second question if you haven't already. if there were any other aha moments or sort of new ways of thinking or resources that you heard about that were helpful today. Chris de la Cruz said he similarly had thought, as Ellen did, about whether multiple core teams, whether there needs to be more of that relational one-to-one kind of stuff before a house meeting. And Debbie is seeing connections that we should perhaps be thinking about how to explore together. I love that. Jules is saying where she gets stuck is, how do I invite people? I resonate with that as well. And Chris says, Lexi helped him come up with a super duper aha question for a set of house meetings. One of the aha moments that I had during the time that Jake and Janelle were sharing is I just got a little softer as I was thinking about house meetings. I was anxious about a lot of things, and I loved the way you presented that. It gave me just a little more space to like, oh yeah, I might be overthinking this. This is like, I can do this. This is like a very welcoming space that you created for us. So thank you for that.
I'm seeing a number of questions in the chat that are really vibrant. So companions, I'm going to ask you to note those. Heartbeat holders, note those and talk to your folks who are bringing those questions forward. And with that, I want to turn it over to Ron, because he is going to bring us some really important life and energy and information about some things that are coming up that will relate directly to what we're talking about tonight, with encounter moving into unveiling and house meetings and how we can build collective power together. Ron, you want to take that on right now?
It's good to be with you all tonight. My name is Ron Werner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the director of Together Lab and a part of this broader coalition. I'm going to share a story, and then I'm going to share an invite that maybe you've heard some murmurings about taking place on Sunday, February 26th, a mass assembly, a time for all of us and the people that we love and the people that we're connected to in our organizing work to show and exercise our power together. But more about that in a moment. The past couple of weeks, I've spent a lot of time with my head down, trying to explore housing options for a family member who's aging and can no longer afford their housing. Already heard some resonance tonight around that. Is there an apartment they can afford? Do we have room in our house? Can we build an ADU in our backyard? Calls and research and not a lot of affordable options. And it's family, so it's both important and complicated. I know we'll figure something out, and I know so many others in our community have to navigate so much more when looking for affordable housing. But I got to tell you, all of that, like looking down at my screen and looking down in anguish, has made it hard to look out and see a horizon where housing and wholeness is possible. What's pulled me out of the loop is knowing that I'm not alone. This week, it was a family member for me, but it was also a story I heard about someone trying to navigate supportive services in Clackamas County. It was lunch with my friend, a chef who sees his staff struggling to afford living in the city they work. It was a parent worried about their teen who said, if we don't get mental health services for all of these youth who have been through such a collective trauma, will they all end up on the streets? It was another set of tent sweeps. Each of us has stories that are ours and are our neighbors. And as individuals, it can feel like it's our fault or we're to blame. But together, we can unveil the systems at play and organize towards a horizon of housing and wholeness. That horizon is blocked by powerful interests. City council members who only listen to wealthy developers, news articles that look for scapegoats to blame, isolated neighbors susceptible to not in my backyardism, a pandemic that has left us all ready to turn on one another rather than turn toward one another, and billboards, literal billboards put up around the city, funded by connected political lobbyists who would have us turn back time rather than look towards that horizon where all can thrive. And so we're coming together as a wider coalition, not as one church or one community or as one individual or as one leader or as staff and non-staff. We're coming together as Clackamas County, Washington County, East Multnomah County, West Multnomah County, our communities and congregations, the people that have been caught up in the swirl of organizing to show and feel our collective power on Sunday, February 26th. From 4 to 6 p.m., we'll be at First Unitarian Church, who is a part of our coalition community. So thankful for Dana Buell, who has helped set up this space for us. But this mass assembly is an opportunity for us to move from the one-to-ones to the land stories, to the house meetings, to a place where we can see just how much power we have built along the way. And I don't know about you, but it's been a long time since I've been with that many people in person at an action. And so it's a little bit of a going public for our coalition. It's sharing with government officials, with all of those who want to block the view of this horizon, the stories that we have heard, and the power that we have, and to say we're ready to change. We're ready to move things. We're ready to remove obstacles. We're ready to build housing, and we're walking together towards a horizon of wholeness. What is a mass assembly and what is it not? As you think about who to invite to this, who gets to thrive in Oregon, mass assembly, I invite you to think about the people who you have talked with as part of your organizing the last 5 months. Maybe they're people from your faith community. Maybe they're people from the school your kids go to. Maybe it's people just fed up with the status quo and want to do something about it. It won't be a consumer experience where you have to make a pitch and say, oh, you got to come. We've got the most dynamic speaker ever, and they're going to tell us how to solve the housing crisis. But what it will be is a chance for us to be co-participants together, to continue stitching together between us these stories that can point us towards a different pathway forward. We really hope that you will come, and we hope that you will invite all of the people that are in your hearts. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to jot down some of those names, some of those people that you've talked to, some of those people you might bring with you to this assembly, to hear these stories, to weave together this greater we. For me, I'm thinking of Carlo, the chef I talked about earlier, who mentioned all of the restaurant workers that he knows who are struggling with destabilization in housing right now. I'm thinking of my friend Jen, who's a neighbor who we were walking with our kids home from school the other day, and she was talking about all that she cares about in the realm of housing and not really sure what to do or where we could go or how anything could ever be different. It's folks like Carlo and Jen who are holding this weight on their own shoulders by themselves, and this is a chance to bring them into our wider movement community. Go ahead and take a minute now, and I invite you to think of names that you're connected to, people that you will invite or could invite to come to this mass assembly, where we look to answer the question, who gets to thrive in Oregon? What I invite you to do now is to total up some of those names. Is it 4 people? Is it 5 people? Yes, Jennifer, love it. Yes, Dad. I know. I told my partner doesn't come to a lot of my work-related things. Like, you gotta come. Like, this is our moment. Share those names or share the number of people in the chat. Yes, Josh, 7 people. Jules, 20 people. Karen and Shauna, and Maureen, and Linda, Jean, Lexi, 15 people, 8 people, 7 so far. I love it. So far, Bob. Awesome. That's great. I'm excited to be with you on February 26th. Your heartbeat holders, organizers, everyone are with you in this process. We'll answer all of the detailed questions like parking and who, what, where, when, why through email. But I can't wait to see you on February 26th. It's going to be a really powerful gathering. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I feel energy just from listening to you, Ron. And so thank you for that. And I'm so excited, like seeing all the totals come in of people and the folks that they want to turn out. And so I'm excited to see everybody in a couple of weeks. In the 400 people you're about ready to turn out. And just a little reminder, that's February 26th from 4 to 6 at First Unitarian Church here in Portland. And then look for more information from your companions and begin turning out. Begin asking your loved ones, inviting your community members and neighbors to be there so that we can show our collective power. A couple of reminders, we have our March Coalition gathering in March, Thursday the 2nd at 6:30 in this link. And then just to note, April, we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're actually going to meet on the second Thursday, April 13th, due to Passover on Monday, Thursday. And so mark your calendars that April has that shift. And then look forward to hearing from your heartbeat holders around investments and things to come. As we get ready to close real fast, I would love to just invite everyone to go into the chat and just like one word, what do you feel inspired after sitting through this incredible gathering around house meetings? Where are you feeling inspiration at? And so I invite you to the chat to just write down one thing, 2 things as we gear up, and I'll wait for a couple of those. Bringing others in, yeah, the turnout. Gratitude, kindness, relationship, motivated by the passion in the room. Absolutely. Yeah, hope. Absolutely. I love that. Well, thank you everyone for being here, for taking the time to say yes out of a busy day to be here, to be now. And may we all hold good energy and love to those who are having house meetings this month and our mass assembly that we're coming out. And so just like in your own hearts or however you send energy, whether it's a prayer, lifting the hands, whatever, of just those who are getting ready to do some great action, and that we're going to come together here in a couple of weeks to do great action together. And so hope and love to you as we do all of that. And then a little announcement or reminder that if you'd like time with your core team this evening from 8 to 8:30, LaVeta has created breakout rooms for you to gather. And so look out for those and join the room. And then from there, we love you and thank you for coming with your energy and the hope and the passion. And let's do this together because there's power in togetherness. Bye, friends.